reluctantly answer the questions, particularly because I was thinking when I was answering that there are cases where the value that the services that the ecosystem or the system, the wetland, provides is not only for the community, but also for the general public. Sometimes people, there are visitors who come to the area who might have a different opinion, who might like this area to be restored. Now everything was focused on the community. Yeah. Now I was also questioning in my mind how, if visitors or outside people were interested in this whole situation or were contacted, how would they put both responses from the community and from the people who are not residing in the area?
Yeah, so here you got one example of almost a protest. You said you did feel it or not? You're reluctant. So you have a protest bid. You may also have protest bids that are simply that I refuse to pay more taxes. And you have a lot of that. So it's very important that after you've done the evaluations exercise, you ask a couple of key questions that permit you to know whether did that person answer 0 because he simply doesn't value these changes, or he put 0 because he's protesting. And if he's protesting, actually he's not competent. You want to take him out. Otherwise you will lower the whole welfare estimates.
Yes. First, one quick feedback. I think, as you have mentioned, if status quo is one of the options, I think it could be also replaced like an option so that we could assess
so it's
better.
So it's equal terms.
Yes,
very
exactly.
good point. And you actually want to do that if you have a choice experiment, because you don't want to bias people to look in one way or the other. Yes.
I think this is really an excellent method of evaluation, because usually the contingency evaluation is criticized because you cannot really identify the value of each attribute. But this time with this method you really can do that one. And also, as you have mentioned, humans are strategic, and if you just ask one question about valuation, usually people have different mind settings, and when they mention the option that they prefer, also they think other things like, oh, I might be taxed a lot, so I should choose another one. But with this method, I guess, with lots of options and choices, then we lose that one, then we really focus on the attributes and try to value those attributes, I guess. That's why this method is quite nice. And my question, what's the boundary of this method? I mean, this can be really implemented at a local level, but what about implementing at a global level? For instance, why don't we value the carbon price with this method? For instance, why don't we ask a valuation method in a COP?
We could, but
to all decision makers and identify the cost of. Okay. Can we do that? Can we do this at a global scale?
It's actually interesting you mentioned carbon, because what is really difficult with carbon is putting what's called a marginal benefit of an extra reduction of 1 unit of ton of carbon, putting a price on that. But you would not be able to bring together 1,000 people and do the same exercise, because people have so different. People will just earn different amounts of money, so they value things differently. So every single survey will have to be specific to the site, to the local context. So you have to implement millions and millions of no, you have to go out to not every city, every province probably, and do an exercise.
So this is more applicable at a provincial or a regional level?
Yes, so the more homogeneous the population is, the more people you can send it out to. So Denmark is a quite small homogeneous country, so when we were questioning where we should have our national parks, we sent out the same survey to everybody. But I don't think you'll be able to do that in any country. And also what I wanted to say about the price range. The price range is supposed to be put in such a way that the lowest price is something that everybody can accept. It's so low that 95 or 99% of people say, yes. And the highest price is supposed to be so high that 95% say no. Because that way your actual willingness to pay is capped within that boundary. Otherwise, if the maximum price was too low, and I was then going to estimate the willingness to pay from results, I would get infinite willingness to pay for those people who have said 300. Okay, that's why understanding what prices what people really are willing to pay is very important. That's the focus group, the pre-testing with people. Yeah. Yeah.
But I mean, we have to be careful also, or you mentioned the local context and how the data or the value was derived. There's clearly a limit when it comes to trying to understand the functioning of the ecosystem and the services it provides to society compared to what each individual thinks about it. So for example, with carbon, I mean, if scientists would not have studied it, or physicists would not have studied its greenhouse gas potential, I would have never known about what carbon dioxide is in the air, the atmosphere, and what it does, and I would have never, it would have been no relevance to me at all, and I would have valued it at zero.
And that's another excellent point, because this is the limitations behind stated preference methods, because they rely to some extent of some sort of awareness, so they show when there's no awareness, and so that's why, for example, if you were going to value the marginal benefit of one reduction of ton of carbon, or let's say 100 million reduction ton of carbon, you would actually want to know what that means in terms of drought in your country and translate it to that person. So you wouldn't ask how much would you be willing to be paid for a 20 million ton reduction of carbon, but how much would you be willing to pay to reduce the droughts to 1 every 10 years instead of 1 every 5 years. So you need, and this is what gets really complicated, like cause-effect relations. And it's great that you have people like Invest that are looking at cause effects with water, and because that can be used directly to these sort of surveys. Okay.
Yeah, so then maybe when you come across, for example, also the TEEP database, where DOF also collected all this value, there was a lot of discussion of, well, we can have all these values separately listed and know that these studies are there, but when it comes to benefit transfer, is it actually possible to take this value from that study and say, well, the people there have the opinion that this is worth that much to them, and then just take it to somewhere else and then say, okay, we make an average of 10 studies and then use the value somewhere else. And this only reflects maybe a certain perception, how public sees a certain service, but it does not really reflect what management strategy is actually needed.
I'm pretty skeptical of benefit transfer, but that's also just because I've just been on the field and I noticed all the subtleties of what makes up preferences and plus values. But I do think that we have to trade off the cost and the benefits of doing these surveys, and they are costly to go and knock on every single door, and so sometimes it's better to have some value than no value, and that's when benefit transfer comes in. And I think maybe, okay, yeah. And the last thing about it's true that you learn when you go along, and that's one of the benefits of choice experiments. It doesn't matter if the first one. Actually, what Danes have started to do is the first choice experiment, the first choice set, they don't count it in the statistical analysis because they know that people learn a lot from the first one. So there are ways to come about the fact that you are learning and reduce the error component. Okay, so I think it was really useful, whether we're going to have statistically significant results from what you wrote down or not. I think it was very useful for you to understand the limitations and the benefits and the uses and all the rest of it, of stated preference methods. And you still have energy, you're motivated, do you want to hear a case study? Want to see this?
Yes.
Okay, good. Because I know afternoons are tough. Okay, so 2007, I was working, there was this big this question in southern France whether a wetland was to be restored or not. And this is published in Ecological Economics, just to ensure you that the results are robust. And so basically, why benefit transfers is sensitive is because we have a tendency to think that wetlands are really good. They're very good. We're ecologists, or biologists, know your name of it. But in this particular place in France, wetlands are associated with something dirty. Well, or they were basically made from. This is a quote from a medical work from 1920. Wetlands are useless, putrid, and the men living there are pitiful victims. This explains quite well, I think, why you've seen such a massive drainage of wetlands in France. 70% of all wetlands have been drained for agricultural production. And it's really funny to see that this concept still lived on. I was so shocked when I started talking with people, locals. The thing was, let me get through this thing. Okay, this area has been completely drained to its minimum to 200 hectares. It used to be more than 2,000 hectares, and for agricultural production. But lately there was a push towards wetland restoration, and one of the triggers was the fact that there had been flooding in the valley. There's decoupling of agricultural payments, so that agricultural payments to farmers are no longer linked to how much they produce. In drainage costs, because electricity has been rising, there is a rising environmental consciousness, there is an increasing water scarcity, and there's now financial compensation schemes to landowners to restore wetlands in France. So it seemed like all the facts, everything was there to just say, why don't we just go ahead and restore? But actually, there's a lot of cultural rigidity, and those that were opposing the most were the policymakers. They said, we defend the interest of the citizens, and they don't want any wetland restoration. So, so the constraints are very much cultural, as I mentioned, related to the fact that you say wetland, it goes mosquito, and then it goes mosquito, it goes ugh, and all the tourists are going to run away, and blah, blah, blah. And so, and another constraint to wetland restoration is that you always have there's user externalities. That if you optimize for reed harvesting, then it's at the expense of the biodiversity. If you optimize for recreation, then it's at the expense of biodiversity. If you want to allow for hunting, which is a very clear source of revenue for landowners, then that will lead to high mosquito levels. Why is that? Because because landowners will put water on the wetland in the summer to attract ducks, so that the hunters will come and shoot the ducks. And it's actually the variation in water levels that causes the explosion in mosquito levels. So that's why there's an incompatibility there as well. What is quite interesting is that people are not aware of that. They just think that there's a lot of, for example, the Camargue areas next by is associated with a lot of mosquitoes. At least 50% of those mosquitoes are simply related to man manipulating water levels, when you would usually, in a typical Mediterranean wetland, have very, very, very slow changes in water levels, and therefore marginal changes in mosquito levels. But on the other hand, we're also aware of the positive externalities. Wetlands are called kidneys of the landscape and biological supermarkets. So there's a real trade-offs here to be made. Okay, and we've considered that the choice experiment was very useful for actually analyzing what would be the benefit, if any benefit, is there any demand for wetland restoration. And yeah, I've said all this before. And so it ideally is suited for defining policy priorities, because you can weight these different aspects against one another. Sorry, a little bit of economics. What we mean by willingness to pay or a welfare consequence, it's assuming that you have an increase in the quantity of some public good, then we say your actual compensating surplus, or what your welfare benefit is, what you would be willing to pay to be equally well off, assume that there's an increase in the quantity or in the quality of the site that you're living. How much would you be willing to pay to be equally well, have the same level of satisfaction as the status quo? So that's what economists really the definition of welfare and.
Sorry, Vanya, do you think you could explain that again?
Yeah, assume there is a change in the quality of your environment. How much would you be willing to pay so that you are exactly equally, that you have exactly the same level of well-being as without the change? Is this hard to conceptualize?
Because you don't have the change, but it will be a definition change in your well-being. Because the quality of the weather may have to move.
Sorry.
Maybe I misunderstood too, but you say that you're measuring the willingness to pay to be just as well off after the change as before the change.
I'll be just as bad off as before the change.
But the change means an improvement in the wetland quality.
Yes, so it's an improvement, that's why you have to pay for it.
Yeah, but then the situation after the change is different than from before the change. Because there will be more birds, for example, so I can go bird watching.
Yeah, so that's why you're willing to pay, so how much you're willing to pay so much that basically if you're 50 euros poorer, that should be the same as.
So you're better off in terms of well-being, except the negative that compensates for that is the price that you pay. And so overall, you're just as well off as you were before because you've lost in monetary terms, but you've benefited in well-being terms. Yeah, does everybody understand that? So for an economist, when they talk about welfare, it's the compensating surplus, the maximum amount of money that the individual can give up after an increase in utilities or well-being without being worse off than without, sorry, was that me who wrote that? Than without the change. Okay, so you're not worse off. You're
better off. You're willing to pay for that difference.
Yeah.
That's the simple one.
Yeah. Sorry. Well, I should have put equations. Okay, so when you're doing a survey, first thing you value what's the valuation problem? What is it actually we're trying to value? Okay, there's a question of a wetland restoration, but what does that imply? So then you identify the attributes of that wetland, typically by focus groups. You pre-test the attributes, again in focus groups or individually. Then you find out additional important questions, such as those that could identify whether you were protesting or not. And then you do a questionnaire, and you pre-test the questionnaire. So you see, it's a long process. And often you pilot study, and then you go back and do another survey. So, as I said, the attributes should be capable of being understood. So it's very good if you make visual, you show people, this is actually how it looks today. Well, that one over there, without the hedges, up here. That's what people, option without wetland and no hedges. And then you show them different options, whether